It's the Friday Night Locker Room. I'm here with Orville Susong and Steve Wilson. We're here to break down this week's games. First up, the game of the week, Bayside versus Melbourne. Orville, what's your outlook for this matchup?
Friday Night Locker Room will travel again to Melbourne High School. The Bayside Bears will also travel there. The Bayside Bears come in a Class 6A 14 team, Matt. They are 5A overall, 3-0 in the district. The Melbourne Bulldogs, the Class 7A team, have lost 2 overall. They're 1-0 in their district. And a big win for them, O'Galley 23-6 2 weeks ago. October 17th is the date the Bulldogs have on their schedule. They're looking at the Vieira Hawks. The Vieira Hawks revenged a win over O'Galley last week, and now they're looking to take on the Melbourne Bulldogs October 17th, and that probably will be the game for the district championship in that district.
Steve, as Orville just said, Melbourne has that big district matchup coming up against the Vieira Hawks, the team I have ranked #1. Do you think Melbourne could...
Excuse me, what did you say? Oh, please, I'm sorry, continue.
Do you think that the Melbourne Bulldogs could fall prey to looking ahead to Vieira and kind of getting caught by surprise on Friday night?
You know, I don't think they will. I think Coach Wilson is too good of a football coach. If you look on paper, the Bayside Bears should win the football game Friday night, but they're undefeated. But if you look at their scores, they're winning such close games. They beat a halfway decent Sebastian River team by 2 points, beat a Rockledge team by a couple of scores. So Bayside, very good football team, but I'm not so sure they're one of the elite teams in the area. The Bulldogs, you've given them 1 extra week to prepare for Bayside. They did not play last week. They've lost a couple of close games. They're at home. I think the Bears are actually primed for an upset this week. I think Melbourne will win a close game, and then they'll gear up for their big game against Vieira.
All right, moving on down, the Cocoa Tigers, team you guys both have as your #1. We all know they're annually one of the best powers in the area, not just Brevard, but the entire state. The Tigers will be traveling up I-95 up to Daytona Municipal Stadium to take on the Sand Crabs of Daytona Seabreeze. Traditionally, Daytona Seabreeze has been one of the other premier programs in the state. We've seen talents such as former FSU quarterback Xavier Carter come through there, along with a long list of others. However, this year, the Seabreeze Sand Crabs are having somewhat of a down year, especially for that program. So, Orville, do you think that this one will be close? Do you expect Cocoa to go up there and just dominate?
Well, last week we spoke of the Cocoa Tigers and Cocoa Beach Minutemen, and I made the statement then, if John Wilkinson did not have to make this game, he would not have played it, just due to the fact of the competition level. I think the Seabreeze Sand Crabs are in the same situation. John Wilkinson would not go to Daytona unless he couldn't find anybody else on the schedule to play. The Sand Crabs are down this year. Mark Beach, a great quarterback. We've known him for a long time. He's been there. He's kept that program going. The Sand Crabs are down this year. I like the Cocoa Tigers to go up there and, again, some young guys get some playing time.
Yeah, I agree. I think Cocoa should have a big night. Steve, is that how you see it?
Yeah, I think the Tigers will do well. The Sand Crabs 1-4 this year, not what we're used to seeing out of them, but they haven't played a team with a losing record this year. So Seabreeze has played some quality programs. They played most of them relatively tight. I think they can give Cocoa a pretty good football game for 2 quarters, but Bruce Judson under center, Jamel Dean, you can just go on and on with talking about the #1 team in Brevard County, Matt.
Right.
Right. You heard him say right. The #1 team in Brevard County, Cocoa Tigers, will come home with a win. But in the first 2 quarters, it may be tight.
Right. Okay, so moving on down, we've got John Carroll at Melbourne Central Catholic. We were able to watch MCC come up just short against First Academy in a game that was delayed by bad weather. And, you know, despite that loss, MCC still appears to have one of the most potent offenses, not just in Brevard, but again, maybe the entire Central Florida region. Orville, do you expect the Hustlers to bounce back in this game after that disappointing loss last week?
Well, you know, I had the Melbourne Central Catholic Hustlers at number 2 all year long. I thought they were a great offensive team. What they showed Friday night at the Friday night locker room game of the week was a defense that could not hold down another good team. First Academy came in and ran all over MCC. The Williams kid, the back for First Academy, 32 carries for 225 yards and however many touchdowns, 4 or 5 touchdowns. So they showed that they could run the ball. I don't think First Academy threw the ball 4 or 5 times all night long. They just gave the ball to their 3 running backs, and they ran all over MCC. John Carroll, a different story. They're not up as good as they are in normal seasons. I like MC to get back on the winning track. The offense will score a lot of points, but Mike Riazzi and the defensive coaches have got to get MCC defense on the right page.
All right, Steve, what's your outlook for this one?
Yeah, I think John Carroll's a quality football program. I think they're one of the top 4 programs in their district. Coach Riazzi has to get the kids back on track and win the football game because their big game is next week at Winter Park at Holy Trinity. They've got to, at Trinity Prep. I think the Hustlers will get back on track. Friday night, they gave up a lot of points, and that concerns me a little bit, but I think they have enough offensive firepower to defeat John Carroll Friday.
All right, up next, we'll be talking about a few different games, including Space Coast, Holy Trinity, and Rockledge. Those games are coming up. Moving right along, another big game this week should be an exciting one. We have Fort Pierce Westwood. They're playing at Heritage. Heritage, Orville, has one of the most exciting playmakers in the county in Josh Gaines. He does just about everything except drive the bus. Tell us about your outlook for this one.
Well, Fort Pierce Westwood goes into Heritage. Heritage, this is a district contest for both of them. The Panthers 4-1 overall, 3-0 in their district. A district win last week against Port St. Lucie. They put up big numbers, 35-3. Josh Gaines doing his part there, obviously. Fort Pierce going on the other direction, unfortunately. They lost to Bayside 2 weeks ago, 42-7. And the Panthers have an easy win this week against Fort Pierce.
Steve, you think that the Panthers will roll?
Yeah, this one's going to get ugly in a hurry. We talk a lot about Josh Gaines. How about the game Deshaun Mills had last Friday? 5 carries, 198 yards. Pretty impressive. So Heritage is not a one-man team, but they're going to win big going away Friday.
Okay, another important game coming up. The Space Coast Vipers hope to rebound after a very disappointing effort against Orlando Jones. They'll be taking on Poinciana. Orville, do you think that Coach Owen can get these players to respond and get back on track here coming up on Friday?
Well, you know, last week I was very surprised that Orlando Jones beat Space Coast. I picked Space Coast to win just because Orlando Jones had not won a game at home all year long. Space Coast goes over there and Orlando Jones beat them 49-14. Very surprised in that score. I thought Space Coast would be able to put up more points than that. Poinciana, on the other hand, I don't think they come in 1-4. They go into Port St. John against the Space Coast Vipers, and Poinciana will get snake bit this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really the perfect opponent for Space Coast to be facing coming up this week if they want to bounce back. Steve, is that how you see it?
Well, the Vipers are going to have to hold on to the football. They did not do that Friday night, and I don't care who you play. If you don't hold on to the ball, it makes it extremely difficult to win the game. Poinciana, as Orville mentioned, hasn't won many games this year. We only won 1 game. But I think the Vipers will rebound. But we said last week that we weren't sure about the quality of opponents that the Vipers had played. So there were so many question marks going into last Friday's game. Wasn't completely surprised that they lost the game. The score surprised me. But I think they will rebound Friday night and win.
All right. So it looks like all 3 of us agree the Vipers will bounce back. Up next, we have Orangewood at Holy Trinity. And let me just say, since Orangewood's out of Brevard County and a former arch rival of my alma mater, MICS, I always hope that Orangewood loses every single game and every single sport by at least 50 points. They'll be playing a Holy Trinity team, Warville, that is led by Coach Hooks, who has a lot of optimism about this squad he has. how do you see things shaking out for Holy Trinity on Friday?
Well, Holy Trinity dropped their second district loss last week to Trinity Prep, 36-28. The good thing is they did put 28 points on the board against a pretty good, decent football team. They take their overall record now to 1-3. I thought Nate Hooks would be a little bit better in the season with his record coming into this this part of the year, but I think the offense has let him down a little bit. West Orange, they come in 1-4. Excuse me, Orangewood comes in 1-4, and they are 0-1 in the district. I think Nate Hooks and Holy Trinity will be able to bounce back from last week's loss. They'll put another district win in.
Yeah, Steve, I agree, not just because I don't like Orangewood, but I think Holy Trinity's record is probably a little deceiving. I think they're better than what that record shows. And let's face it, that is one of the toughest districts in not just Central Florida, or not just this area, but arguably anywhere in the state. You have John Carroll in there, MCC as well. You think Holy Trinity will turn things around?
Yeah, I think they'll bounce back. No shame in losing to Trinity Prep last Friday. That Trinity Prep has a chance to make the playoffs. MCC is going to have to beat them next week and get past John Carroll this week to even make the playoffs. I think Trinity Prep is very, very good. Yeah, but Coach Hooks' Tigers, they're going to do well. Orangewood Christian, you'll like the score at the end of the game, Matt. This is going to be a big Tiger win.
Coach Nevad, did you hear that? We're all expecting Orangewood to lose. There's something we can look forward to. Coming up, we have 3 games on tap: Treasure Coast at Rockledge, Vieira at Atlantic, and International at MICS. Those games will be coming right up. All right, down to the final 3 matchups of the week. We have Treasure Coast traveling to Rockledge. Orville, Rockledge has been an interesting team this year. They seem to have that trademark Raider defense in some moments, but then in other games, you wonder what's going on with that group. Kind of schizophrenic, so to speak, with that defense. And then, Rockledge's offense has never been a high-scoring team anywhere in its history, really. They've always relied on that defense. Where do you see the Raiders? We're about halfway through the season. Do you think they can start to show some signs of progress at this point?
Well, the Rockledge Raiders have not won a football game this year, and that's sad for that program because of the tradition that Larry Laskowski, Pat Lusk, and all of the coaches at that school have. Also, they've had some transfers at the beginning of the year that left the Rockledge program and went other places, and some of them doing very well at high-profile programs. So that had a lot to do with that right there. Plus, the numbers are down at Rockledge High as far as football players. But like I said, they haven't won a ball game all year long. But, I think that they have an opportunity this week. But one thing I want to bring up, before this program airs this week on SpaceCoastDaily.com, the Rockledge Raiders will have a win. They have 2 games this week. They play Astronaut Monday night. Astronaut also a 0-4 team. And I think the Raiders have a great opportunity there to get a win then. And also on Friday night, at the end of Friday night, I think the Rockledge Raiders will have 2 wins.
Right, that's an important point to make. Just so our viewers know, Friday night we saw all kinds of crazy weather come through the county. I was giving Orville and Steve updates as I was doing my best Jim Cantori impression, driving across the county through the ridiculous weather. Somehow these guys managed to avoid the worst of it by the time I caught up with them on Friday, but we had some postponements, and actually one that was postponed all the way to Monday. So that, again, will be Astronaut and Rockledge, which should be over by the time you view this video. But, Steve, do you think that Rockledge will have 2 wins under its belt at the end of this week?
Oh, I think they'll have at least 1 win. I don't think there's any question they'll beat Treasure Coast. The Raiders, we talked last week about how tough their schedule was at the outset. Going into last Friday night's games, the Raider opponents were 15-1, so they played Vieira, Palm Bay, Bayside, and Heritage. They played 4 really good teams. So, I don't think they're as bad as their record indicates. Still a quality defense. I think the Raiders will defeat Treasure Coast Friday night.
Okay, so it sounds like we all agree that the Raiders will start to turn the corner and show some signs of progress this week after going through really just a gauntlet of some really tough opponents. Up next, the Vieira Hawks will travel to Atlantic, Port Orange area up in Volusia County. The Vieira Hawks, I saw them on Friday night take on O'Galley. They won soundly there, 42-0. Orville, as you've mentioned, the Hawks have yet to play a really high-caliber opponent. However, at the same time, can't overlook the fact that their offense is producing a lot of points, and that defense has been pretty impressive. They seem to be executing all over the field. They travel up to Atlantic. How do you see this game shaping up?
Well, you know, we saw the Viera Hawks a couple of weeks ago when the Friday night locker room did their game in Viera, and I was very impressed with the offense and the defense. The defense showed some signs of brilliance at points. Offense, it seems like they just throw it up and let one of the Nixon boys run under it. That's a great thing to have an athlete like that on the field in any program, but the Viera Hawks lucky that they have him there. But the thing I like about the Viera Hawks, and I haven't said this before, but very conditioned team. It seems like they go from the first minute to the end of the ball game playing full speed, and you have to like that. They got beat by O'Galley last year. They were able to revenge that district loss this year. So now the next revenge that they're after are the Melbourne Bulldogs. I hope they don't overlook Atlantic, Port Orange, waiting on the Melbourne Bulldogs. I don't think they will. I think this is another opportunity for the Viera Hawks to put up big numbers on the football field this Friday night.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of programs might catch that problem where they have the big opponent looming large on the schedule and maybe overlook an upcoming opponent, but I believe that Coach Mays over at Viera knows better. As someone who's worked with a relatively new program, I don't think he'll let the Hawks sleep on this one. What about you, Steve?
No, and even if he does, if they do sleep, they're still going to win the football game because they're that much better than Atlantic. It's not even close. To me, the most impressive thing last week was the fact that the Hawks defense held Tim Price to 27 yards rushing. He's a good running back. He's one of the better running backs in Brevard County. So we talk so much about Kingston, about Zach Blanche, the offense, Nixon, but they have a great defense, they being the Hawks. I think they'll win going away this week, and then they'll be primed and ready for the Bulldogs the following week.
Okay, and then last on the list we have International at MICS. Each week I've mentioned how MICS is really down in the numbers this year. They don't even have enough for the second unit. They have about 20 players in that roster. It's been a very tough season for Coach Nevad and the Cougars. They fell again last week. If there is a bright side, if there is a silver lining, the Cougars were able to put some points on the board. Orville, how do you see this game coming up versus International?
Well, Merritt Island Christian put up 16 points, like you said, on the board last week. That's the first points they put on the board all year long. I think that gives them some things to work on, things that Coach David Nevad can talk to the offense about. Look, we put up 16 points. Now we go from here, and I really think that's a bright spot for them. David Nevad had the Cougars on a roll. If Steve Wilson can pick the Satellite Scorpions to beat the Merritt Island Mustangs, I think I can pick Merritt Island Christian to beat International this week.
Well, and there's an alumni breakfast coming up on Saturday, and there's nothing I'd like more than to show up to that alumni breakfast and talk about the Cougars getting their first win of the season. Steve, what do you think I'll be able to say when I show up?
Well, let's first talk about the Satellite Merritt Island game. I always say it's real sad when people live in the past. That's a game that's way in the past we don't need to be talking about. But the Cougars, I'd love to say they're going to win the football game this week. They did score their first points of the year. On paper, the teams are identical. Neither one of them's won a football game. Something's got to give. It's just not going to be the Cougars this Friday. They're going to come up a field goal short.
All right, so we have a 2-1 difference there. That wraps up the matchups for this week. Coming up, our favorite part of the week, we'll talk about our top 5, and I'm sure I'll get plenty of criticism for mine. All right, it's for our favorite part of the week. It's time for the top 5. I'll start off with mine. Starting off at number 5, I have the Bayside Bears. I believe Bayside is worthy of that top 5 spot. I had to do some shuffling since Melbourne Central Catholic lost on Friday night. As a result, Bayside took the number 5 spot. At number 4, I dropped the Palm Bay Pirates from 3 to 4 because, as we know, Palm Bay dropped to the Titusville Terriers. Having said that, I don't think they should be penalized that much for the loss because, as you all know, since week 1, I've had Titusville in my top 5, and right now it looks like that was a pretty savvy pick on my part. On that note, I have the Titusville Terriers at number 3. I know that might sound pretty surprising, but I had them at 5. They knocked off another top 5 team, so I thought it was only fair to move the Terriers up. And I think Coach Lawrence should be the top nominee for Coach of the Year with the job he's doing there. Number 2, the Cocoa Tigers. Now, before I go any further, let me just say that we did put Coach Johnny Wilkinson in the Space Coast Sports Hall of Fame. So this is no knock on Coach Wilkinson or the Tigers. I think Cocoa, you could make the case that they are definitely the first team in the county, and they've played like it all season long. We've seen Jamel Dean. He will be a future Buckeye. But I have them at number 2. My number 1 team will remain the Vieira Hawks, much to the dismay of my partners here. The way I look at this is just all-around performance in the 3 phases of the game, and especially this week. Granted, O'Galley isn't the strongest opponent in the world, but what I really liked from the Hawks is they're very opportunistic, and I think they play to their nickname. They're very opportunistic like a Hawk. They're always around the ball. They're just great playmakers, and a great example was after that rain delay this week, they came out and they were up 14-0. They were kicking off. O'Galley, you could tell they were ready to get out there and respond to get back into the game. What does Vieira do? They force a fumble, recover, and then score 2 plays later just to put the game away. I think that's what number 1 teams do. They just find a way to just put games away early and then roll from there. So the Vieira Hawks will remain my number 1 team. Orville, I have a feeling your top 5 may look a little bit different.
Well, it does, and just because, all 3 of us, we do not talk about this at all. The first thing, like Steve said earlier, Matt, you shouldn't live in the past. Trying to win points with John Wilkinson of the Cocoa Tigers by telling him that you put him into the Hall of Fame last year doesn't cut any mustard with me. And number 2, I don't even believe you know what Savi means. So those 2 things right there are enough to tell you that the Vieira Hawks should not be at number 1 in Brevard County. But we'll move it around some, and like all 3 of us, I'm sure, we've moved to the top 5. Friday night and Saturday in college football were 2 of the most amazing days in football history, I think, for all of the big guys falling. So things should change in college and also in high school, and I think they do out of these 3. But I have back again, I have number 5 teams, and that's the Titusville Terriers. I drop MCC all the way down to number 5, along with Titusville out of the number 2 spot. And the reason I did that was because I saw a lot of defensive mistakes made by the Hustlers last week. So I have Titusville, Wayne Lawrence, and them. You have to. Wayne Lawrence is doing a great job in Titusville. You have to like everybody buying into what he's trying to sell up there. I think it's working, and so I've got Titusville and MCC at number 5. At number 4, I have Palm Bay. I dropped them down from the number 3 spot last week. They lost to the Titusville Terriers, which was why I put them back in the top 5. At number 3, I've got the Bayside Bears. The Bayside Bears, I put in the number 5 spot last week, the first time they were in the number 5 in my top 5. They are undefeated. They're playing real good football right now. They play smash mouth football, which I really like. They just want to run it right down your throat. I like that type of football team. I got the Bayside Bears at number 3. At number 2, I move up the Vieira Hawks. Vieira Hawks, undoubtedly a very, very good football team. I'm still waiting for them to play a team that will give them some competition, and I don't think they have it. I don't think the Melbourne Bulldogs will give them that competition that they need. I think they run the table. I think they go undefeated this year, but I'm going to say this very quickly. Cocoa, number 1. I am tired of trying to defend why I have Cocoa at number 1 to you. If you can't see the situations that the Cocoa Tigers have and where they put themselves to play big-time football programs, I can't help you anymore, Matt.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the college game day crew here. I think I'm the Lee Corso of the bunch. But, Steve, how about your top 5?
I went to Orville, Matt O'Hearn and Savvy Picks. That's something you don't see in the same sentence every day or say here. Sure. Yeah, I have 3 honorable mention teams. So okay. I'm thinking if I keep going, I'll mention all the teams in the county.
Top 5 and honorable mention.
We'll let Steve do his honorable mention. Oval and I will stick by our 5. And
all right, 3 honorable mention, Merritt Island Mustangs. If they hadn't lost to Centennial earlier in the year, I'd have them in the top 5. Impressive win last week against the Scorps. The Hustlers from MCC, I've dropped out of my top 5. They're honorable mention. You give up 63 points in a football game, I don't think you're one of the top 5 teams in the county. Granted, they played the best team in their district, but they've got a ways to go defensively. The Bayside Bears, I know they're undefeated, but they're winning all their games, but they're winning so tight and so close. I think the 5 teams I have ranked ahead of them would beat them on any given Friday night. Number 5, the Heritage Panthers. They're good. They've lost one game this year to the Palm Bay Pirates, week 1 by a field goal. They just do a lot. They run the ball. They play defense. I love what they're doing in South Brevard. The Palm Bay Pirates, number 4. They did lose to Titusville last week, which surprised me, but they're still good, a quality team. They were number 3 in the state going into last Friday. Obviously, they're going to drop. They will be number 4 for me. Number 3, the Titusville Terriers. You have to put them slightly above the Pirates, basically because of their win last week. They've only lost one game this year, and that was to Cocoa High, and they scared Cocoa to death. They weren't far from being undefeated. Number 2 is the team that should be number 2. That's the Vieira Hogs. I'd love to see them play the true number 1 team in the county, the Cocoa Tigers, because they would give Cocoa fits. They really would. But Cocoa's still the number 1 team in the county with Vieira a notch behind them.
Well, I hope that the coaches and athletic directors really listen when we talk about these potential matchups that would be so great, because I think we'd all love to see Cocoa versus Palm Bay, Cocoa versus Vieira. Hopefully, in the future, we can see everyone work together to put these matchups on the table. Not to say that these coaches and athletic directors don't do a great job, but how much better would the experience be if we were able to see some of these powerhouses square off in the regular season? I think it would sell out the stadiums, and I think it would be a great hit with the whole community. So for another week here on the Space Coast, we hope you've enjoyed the season thus far. We head into the second half of the season already. It's hard to believe. So we look forward to seeing you this upcoming week. Bayside at Melbourne. Be sure to tune in Friday night at 7 o'clock.